Middle-earth rises before me each time I speak its name, not as a distant myth but as a living realm, shaped by language, memory, and the quiet pulse of ancient days. When I step into it, I do so with the certainty of one who has walked those roads before, hearing the wind carry echoes from the west and feeling the weight of stories older than the mountains. You stand with me now, and I see the same curiosity flickering in your eyes, the quiet pull of a world that knows how to call someone by the heart rather than by the ear. Nothing in our world resembles the depth of this place, for every corner of Middle-earth breathes with intention. I speak of a land that feels carved from old songs, where the soil remembers triumph and ruin alike, where even silence has a texture shaped by ages long gone. And as I move through its valleys in thought, I carry you with me, so you may sense the world not through exposition but through presence, as if the lantern in my hand were yours to hold. Even now, I can picture the Shire unfolding in gentle hills, glowing with the softness of hearthlight and the scent of tilled earth. Life moves slowly there, each hour marked by laughter, warm bread, and the hum of stories traded between neighbors. I once spent an evening beneath the round windows of Hobbiton, watching smoke curl into the twilight. There is peace in that place, a peace so complete that one might believe danger has never brushed the edges of the world. Yet beyond its emerald borders lie forests where time stretches differently, where elves walk with a grace that makes the air itself tremble. Rivendell, for instance, stands like a thought halfway between memory and dream, its waterfalls gleaming like silver ribbons cast from the hands of the sky. When I wandered its terraces, the stones felt old enough to speak, and the music drifting from hidden chambers made my heart move in ways I still cannot name. Middle-earth shifts shape depending on where your feet fall, and every land bears its own truth. Traveling farther, the world turns darker and heavier beneath each breath. The White Mountains rise like sentinels, forged from frost, and their shadows stretch over kingdoms once proud and fierce. Gondor stands beneath their watch, tall and pale, carved from stone that seems capable of remembering every triumph and every sorrow. I recall the first moment I saw Minas Tirith from afar, tier upon tier rising as if reaching for something beyond mortal grasp. Even then, the city looked like a plea held against the darkness gathering in the east. And beyond that eastern horizon, Mordor broods in silence, a silence so harsh it presses against the bones. Nothing grows freely there, nothing laughs. It is a land shaped not by nature but by will, a testament to a power that seeks dominion rather than harmony. Every gust of wind carries the taste of ash, as though the land itself mourns what it once might have been. Yet even in that darkness, the world holds a strange clarity, reminding me that courage does not grow in comfort but in shadow. When I speak of Middle-earth, I do not speak of fantasy. I speak of a place that reveals something essential about every traveler who enters it. The world changes shape depending on the heart that beholds it. Some find wonder, others find fear. I have walked its roads enough to understand that the land listens. It listens when your resolve falters, when your curiosity sparks, when your spirit wants to turn back or step forward. And as you stand beside me now, I sense the same pull tugging at you, the invitation to see beyond simple adventure and witness a world where every river, every ruin, every whisper of wind holds meaning. Middle-earth does not ask you to escape reality. It asks you to understand it better, through heroes who stumble, lands that endure, and stories woven with the quiet truth that even the smallest person can change the course of the future. I shape this world in my mind each time I recall how its foundations were laid, not with stone or steel, but with syllables, histories, and the pulse of languages older than memory. When I first stepped into the heart of Middle-earth, I realized I was entering a creation unlike any realm fashioned merely for entertainment. This world grew from the quiet work of a linguist who believed that language births culture, and that culture, in turn, shapes the destinies of entire peoples. I could feel that intention in every name, every melody, every rune carved into wood or stone. Nothing in Middle-earth exists by accident. Each river and ridge carries a story written long before any mortal eyes beheld it. I remember standing beneath the trees of an elven forest and sensing that even the leaves whispered in a tongue shaped by centuries of thought. Tolkien forged not just a map, but a universe held together by the logic of speech and the weight of legend. A universe I now walk you through as if guiding your hand across the script of an ancient scroll. The elven tongues were the first that truly struck me, refined and luminous, as if crafted from the breath of starlight. I heard them once on a quiet night in Rivendell when voices drifted from a balcony above, weaving a melody that felt older than grief, older than longing. Those words did not simply sound beautiful. They carried a memory of the people who spoke them, a people shaped by patience, devotion, and the ache of timelessness. Their language told me everything before they ever spoke of themselves. In that moment, I understood why Tolkien shaped Middle-earth around language. For a world is only as deep as the voices that inhabit it. Even the harsh strokes of the dwarven runes carried purpose, carved with hands accustomed to stone and fire, revealing a culture rooted in endurance and pride. And as I listened, I realized that I was not learning languages, I was learning lives. As I wandered through this world, each region revealed itself through its speech, and each legend felt anchored in the way those who lived it shaped their stories. The Rohirrim spoke with a rhythm reminiscent of old northern epics, strong and solemn, as if their words were forged beside the thundering hooves of their horses. Gondor's people carried a more measured tone, honed by centuries of leadership and the weight of duty. In their voices, I heard the echo of Numenor, a kingdom lost to the sea yet still alive in every syllable spoken by their descendants. Even the hobbits, with their warm and humble turns of phrase, taught me that simplicity can hold wisdom as profound as any ancient text. Each tongue revealed a worldview, and every worldview shaped the world itself. This was not fiction. It was a tapestry woven with the logic of real cultures. Legends rose naturally from such languages, as if each myth had grown directly from the soil that nourished the voices of its people. I learned that tales in Middle-earth do not float loosely above history. They are anchored deep within it. When an elf recounts the fall of a great kingdom, I hear not just the words but the pain carried across centuries. When a dwarf speaks of ancient halls glittering with gold, I sense the longing for a home lost to shadow. And in the Shire, stories come alive with laughter, good food, and the comfort of friendship, reminding me that even the smallest tales hold power. These legends create the moral landscape of Middle-earth, shaping how each people sees themselves and how they face the vast uncertainties that breathe beyond their borders. Yet the most striking truth is that all these languages and legends intertwine, shaping a unified world where every story echoes another. The downfall of Numenor influences the politics of Gondor. The pride of ancient elven lords shapes the grief of later ages. The whispers of the First Age still tremble in the shadows of the Third. As I walk through this world, I feel the layers beneath my feet like rings of a great tree, each age supporting the next. No land stands alone, and no story fades without leaving its mark. This level of depth does not simply entertain. It transforms the one who steps into it, urging them to consider how their own world is shaped by the words and tales passed down through time. I guide you now through this universe, not as a detached observer, but as someone who has felt its weight and its wonder. Middle-earth taught me that a world becomes real when its languages breathe life into its people and its legends give purpose to their steps. When you listen to the elves speak, when you hear the songs of the Rohirrim, when you read the runes carved by dwarven hands, you begin to sense the heartbeat of a universe, forged not from spectacle, but from meaning. And as you walk beside me through this realm shaped by language and legend, you may feel what I felt, the quiet realization that this world holds truth not because it resembles ours, but because it reveals what lies beneath the surface of any world that dares to remember its stories. The One Ring revealed its nature to me long before I ever laid eyes upon it, for its shadow stretches farther than its small golden shape suggests. When I first understood its power, I realized how cleverly it hides behind simplicity. A smooth band of gold, unmarked to the untrained eye. Yet beneath that quiet surface lies a will that does not sleep. I sensed, even before learning its history, that this object was not crafted merely to channel magic, but to command it. It does not roar with menace, it whispers, and sometimes a whisper reaches deeper into the heart than any threat. I remember the first tale I heard about it, spoken with the hushed reverence of someone describing a force that should never have existed. And in that moment I knew that the ring's danger came not from destruction, but from the promise of control. The truth behind its creation settled upon me slowly. I learned that it was forged by a mind consumed not with chaos, but with the desire for order through domination. Sauron did not yearn to burn the world to ashes. He wanted it to bend, to kneel, to reflect only his will. That intention seeped into the ring itself. Whenever I speak of it, I cannot help but feel that I am describing an object alive with its creator's purpose, an extension of a hand that still reaches long after the body that shaped it fell into ruin. I felt this most keenly when I stood near someone who bore it, for the air around them seemed to tighten, as if the world itself hesitated to breathe too deeply. The ring does not shout its intentions. It wraps them in desire, in subtle temptation, in the quiet suggestion that one's own will might be enough to reshape fate. I once watched a good-hearted person hold the ring in their palm, and in that instant, the light around them sharpened in a way I could not fully describe. Their eyes did not gleam with greed, but with possibility, as though they glimpsed a future they could control if only they accepted its offer. That was when I understood the ring's brilliance. It does not corrupt through fear, it corrupts through hope. It convinces the bearer that the world needs their strength, their clarity, their leadership. At first, they believe they are acting for the good of others. Only later do they realize that the voice guiding them is not their own. The shift happens quietly, never in a single moment. It grows like a vine, subtle and persistent. By the time the truth becomes clear, the vine has already wrapped itself around the heart. Its history is written in the downfall of kings and the ruin of ancient realms. Every story tied to the ring carries the same pattern. Someone reaches for it with noble intentions, only to find themselves lost in a maze of their own desires. I remember reading ancient accounts of how its influence spread through the 9 mortal kings who accepted the rings of power. They sought glory for their people, stability for their lands. Instead, the One Ring's shadow drew them into a half-life, neither living nor dead, bound to the will of the one who forged the Master Ring. Their transformation taught me something vital. Corruption does not always strike swiftly. Often it begins with a single thought, a single justification, whispered gently enough that it does not feel wrong at all. When I walked through lands touched by the ring's legacy, I felt that history pressing against the air. Ruins remained where kingdoms once stood, their stones marked not by natural decay but by the weight of choices shaped by the ring's influence. I came to understand that the ring does not simply affect individuals. Its reach extends farther, bending nations and shaping centuries. Even those who never saw it felt the consequences of its presence. Wars were waged because of it, alliances formed and shattered, hopes raised and broken. The ring does not merely change the one who carries it, it alters the world in subtle waves, each choice rippling outward. Yet the most unsettling truth is that the ring adapts to the bearer's nature. I realized this the first moment I witnessed someone resist its call, only to later falter under the weight of doubt. The ring does not always attack the strongest part of the heart. It seeks the thinnest crack, the place where fear or longing or ambition already lives. It learns, it waits. It offers precisely what the bearer secretly wishes they could have, and in offering that wish, it gains a foothold. It might be the desire to protect loved ones, to restore a broken land, to claim justice for a wrong. These are noble wishes. Yet the ring twists them so gently that the difference between righteousness and tyranny becomes nearly invisible. I have seen the ring's darkness in moments of silence rather than violence. A trembling hand reaching for it after vowing to keep it at distance, a voice sharpening in tone without realizing why, a lingering stare upon the gold as if it were the answer to every burden. Its influence is patient, and patience is often the sharpest blade. I recall walking beside someone burdened by its presence, watching their resolve erode grain by grain. The struggle was quiet, almost invisible to others, yet it raged within them like a storm pressed beneath a still surface. In those moments, I understood why even the wise feared the ring. No one is immune to the temptation of believing they can master power without being mastered by it. The darkness behind the ring does not stem solely from Sauron's malice, but from the truth it reveals about those who encounter it. It forces them to confront their own shadows, their own insecurities, their own hidden hunger for influence or certainty. It does not invent these weaknesses, it magnifies them. That is why its danger feels so intimate. When someone falters under its weight, they are not succumbing to an external enemy but to a reflection of themselves, sharpened and distorted. I often think that the ring's greatest cruelty lies in this. It convinces the bearer that they are acting freely, even as every step leads them deeper into its design. When I reflect on the One Ring, I realize that its power is not found in destruction but in seduction. It offers clarity where there is confusion, strength where there is fear, control where there is chaos. And yet, every gift carries a cost hidden behind its shine. The ring's true darkness is the belief that its power can be used without consequence. I have never met someone who held it without feeling its pull, subtle or overwhelming. Its voice may be faint, but it becomes impossible to forget. Even from a distance, I could sense it lingering like a presence that watches, calculating quietly. In the end, I understood why it had to be unmade, why no one, no matter how noble, could carry it safely. The ring reveals not who we pretend to be, but who we truly are, and that truth is a weight no one should bear. I felt the weight of destiny settle over us the moment the fellowship formed, not as a ceremony or declaration, but as a quiet recognition among 9 travelers who understood that the path ahead would demand more than strength. It would demand surrender, trust, and the courage to walk into darkness without knowing if we would ever return. I remember standing in the hall of Elrond, listening to the uneasy silence that stretched between strangers from distant lands, each carrying histories that could have divided us. Yet in that silence, I sensed the beginnings of something rare, a fragile unity forged not by agreement but by necessity. The ring lay at the center of us like a silent challenge, and as I looked around, I understood that each of us saw a reflection of what we feared most in its golden curve. I watched Frodo accept the burden with a humility that made me question every strength I thought I possessed. He was small, quiet, visibly overwhelmed, and yet he stepped forward when no other voice rose. That moment revealed to me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to answer despite it. Beside him, Sam stood already bracing himself, not for glory or recognition, but for loyalty. His devotion struck me with a force greater than any sword raised on a battlefield. Sam saw the danger in Frodo's eyes before Frodo himself did, and from that moment onward he bound his fate to the journey with a steadiness I often wished I could claim for myself. Merry and Pippin, lively and untested, brought something no strategy or wisdom could have offered. Their spirit kept us from drowning in the gravity of our mission, their mischief echoing the Shire in places where hope felt thin. I sometimes looked at them and wondered whether innocence was a form of armor, for they faced terrors with wide eyes yet unbroken hearts. They reminded me that joy is not the opposite of danger but a defiance against it. In their laughter I heard what we were fighting to preserve. Aragorn carried the quiet strength of someone who had lived too long with doubt, a leader who had not yet claimed his name. There were nights when he kept watch and I saw in his face the weight of a lineage he had no desire to wield, yet could not refuse. His loyalty was not born from obligation, but from conviction. I learned much from the way he walked, alert, burdened, and yet gentle. He held our group together not through command but through presence, a steadying force that grounded us when uncertainty tried to pull us apart. Legolas moved with an ease I had never witnessed in another being. His very breath aligned with the rhythm of leaves, wind, and starlight. It was not his skill with the bow that impressed me most, but his silence, the way he perceived danger before any mortal sense could grasp it. His companionship with Gimli became, to my surprise, the most unexpected comfort along the road. What began as distrust, shaped by ancient grievances, slowly softened into respect, then into camaraderie strong enough to rival steel. Watching them transform rivalry into friendship taught me that history may shape us, but it does not imprison us. Gimli himself carried the pride of his people in every word he spoke, each phrase hammered with the force of a craftsman who knows the value of what he protects. His anger flared quickly, but so did his laughter, and beneath his rugged exterior lived a heart capable of fierce loyalty. He proved that a companion's worth is measured not by their elegance but by the constancy of their spirit. Many times, when the path grew brutal, I felt steadier simply knowing he was near, axe in hand, ready to defend us without hesitation. Boromir brought complexity into our circle, a noble man torn between duty and desire. His strength was undeniable, but so was the shadow cast by the hope he placed in the ring. I watched him struggle more deeply than the others, fighting an invisible battle between the need to save his people and the dangerous belief that the ring might offer salvation. His conflict taught me that even the bravest can fall, and that redemption often arises in the final choices rather than the first. His sacrifice etched itself into my memory with a painful clarity, a reminder that honor sometimes emerges only after we face our own darkness. And then there was Gandalf, the guide whose wisdom shaped us without force. His presence anchored us even when the world seemed to crack open beneath our feet. He carried knowledge, his eyes rarely revealed, and though he walked like an old wanderer, he moved with a purpose, forged beyond the measure of mortal years. When he fell into shadow, the fellowship fractured not because our mission changed, but because he had been the light we navigated by. His absence forced us to confront ourselves, to step forward without the comfort of his guidance, and that trial became the crucible that defined the remainder of our journey. As I reflect on those days, I realize that the fellowship was never meant to be a perfect unit. It was a convergence of flaws, fears, strengths, and hopes, bound together by a single thread of fate. We were 9 souls walking toward one doom, each shaped by different lands and different histories, yet connected by a purpose larger than any one of us. Our differences were not obstacles, but essential elements of the path. Without the courage of the small, the wisdom of the old, the strength of the mighty, and the loyalty of friends, the ring would have remained unbroken in its circle of power. I walked beside them through forests that whispered warnings, across mountains that tried to swallow us, and into darkness where hope flickered like a dying flame. Each step revealed more of who we were. No masks, no illusions, only truth forged through hardship. And though the fellowship did not remain whole, its spirit endured in every choice we made afterward. I carry those memories with me still, not as tales of triumph, but as reminders that unity is not the absence of conflict, but the decision to move forward together despite it. Bilbo has always stood in my memory as the quiet spark that lit the first flame, long before the fellowship ever existed. When I think back on the beginning of this saga, I see him not as a relic of an older tale, but as the first thread that bound every later event together. I remember meeting him in Rivendell after his long wandering had ended. Age touched him gently, as though time itself hesitated to disturb the spirit that had carried the ring without fully breaking beneath it. There was a wistful clarity in his eyes, the look of someone who had glimpsed both wonder and danger, and now lived suspended between gratitude and regret. He spoke to me of his journey, not as an adventurer boasting of triumphs, but as someone acknowledging the unpredictable tide of fate. His presence reminded me that every great story begins long before we realize it has begun, shaped by choices that seem small at the time but later echo through ages. Elrond, in contrast, carried the weight of centuries, with the calm dignity of one who has outlived countless sorrows. When I walked through his halls, I felt as though the air itself held memory. His voice had a tone that could steady even the most anxious heart, not because he sought authority, but because he understood its burden. I remember watching him speak to leaders of different realms, his gaze steady, his words shaped with the precision of someone who had witnessed empires rise and fall. The wisdom he offered did not impose direction. It revealed possibility. He guided us not through commands, but through clarity. I sensed in him a deep grief for all that Middle-earth had lost, yet his hope remained unbroken, woven into the very light of Rivendell. Galadriel was different still, a presence that seemed woven from both starlight and resolve. When I first stood in Lothlorien and felt her gaze rest upon me, it was as though she saw beyond the edges of my thoughts, past the doubts I hid even from myself. Her beauty was not merely physical, it was a quiet radiance forged from strength and endurance. She carried an ancient power, yet she held it gently, aware of how easily great gifts could twist the heart. I remember how she spoke to us with words that lingered long after the sound faded, each phrase revealing truth with a softness that made it easier to bear. Her wisdom reminded me that even those who seem distant from the world's struggles are shaped by them, and that the greatest strength often lies in restraint rather than force. Not all who influenced our path walked in the light. Saruman's story haunts me still. I once admired him from afar, believing his knowledge to be unmatched, his intentions aligned with all who sought the safety of Middle-earth. Yet when I finally encountered the consequence of his choices, I realized that his fall was not a sudden plunge, but a gradual shift born from pride. He convinced himself that understanding darkness allowed him to control it, not realizing how quietly that darkness reshaped his will. Standing before the ruins of Isengard, I understood the cost of his ambition. There was no triumph in his power, only isolation. His tale remains a warning carved into my memory, a reminder that even the wise can lose their way when they believe themselves immune to corruption. Theoden brought a different kind of sorrow into my awareness, one tempered by courage and honor. When I first saw him, weakened by manipulation and clouded by despair, I felt an ache sharpen within me. A king reduced to a shadow of himself reflects the suffering of all who depend on him. Yet when the veil of deception lifted and his spirit rekindled, I witnessed the revival of a leader whose heart beat fiercely for his people. I rode with him across the fields of Rohan, and each stride spoke of renewed purpose. His voice rang clear once more, not with the arrogance of command, but with the sincerity of a ruler who understood the price of loyalty. His story is etched in my mind, not only for his victories, but for the moment he stood again as the man he had always been. Éowyn's strength revealed itself to me slowly, not through bold declarations, but through quiet defiance. I saw how the yearning for honor shaped her, how she struggled beneath the expectations imposed by those who wished to protect her by limiting her. Her courage was forged from longing to defend her people, to break free from a life circumscribed by caution. When I think of her now, I see not only her triumph on the battlefield, but the determination that carried her there. Her bravery was not an act of rebellion. It was the natural expression of a spirit that refused to remain unseen. She taught me that heroism takes many forms, and that the longing to serve comes from the same place as the longing to live fully. Faramir's presence struck me with a gentleness I did not expect. He carried the grace of a man who understood both duty and humility, someone who saw clearly the lure of power yet refused it even when the choice offered him the approval he longed for. I remember speaking with him beneath the fading light of the day, feeling the quiet conflict that shaped his life. The weight of his father's expectations pressed heavily upon him, yet he did not let that pressure bend his principles. His courage lay not in battle alone, but in the refusal to become what others insisted he should be. He revealed to me that true strength lies in recognizing one's own worth, even when others fail to see it. All these figures, heroes, mentors, wanderers, and fallen souls created a tapestry far larger than the fellowship itself. Their stories intertwined with ours, each choice influencing the path we walked. They shaped the world, not by carrying the ring, but by carrying the hopes, fears, and histories that surrounded it. When I look back, I realize that the fellowship could not have endured without the echoes of these lives guiding us. They were not merely supporting characters. They were the unseen pillars of our journey, each one reminding me that the fate of Middle-earth rested not in a single quest, but in the countless hearts willing to stand against the darkness in their own way. Theoden's story came to me not in a thunderous moment of revelation, but in the quiet heaviness that settled over his hall when I first stepped into the golden hall of Meduseld. The air felt stifled, as though weighed down by years of grief disguised as routine. I saw a king who had once ridden proudly at the head of his riders, now reduced to a shadow of himself. His shoulders slumped under an invisible burden, his eyes dulled by doubt planted so subtly he no longer recognized it as foreign. Watching him sit on that throne, frail and withdrawn, I felt the ache of a kingdom losing its heart one slow breath at a time. Yet beneath that melancholy silence lived a spark not yet extinguished, a truth clearer to me later when hope rose again in Rohan. When the veil of manipulation was finally torn away, when the poison of deceit lost its grip on his mind, I witnessed a transformation that left me breathless. Theoden stood tall again, his voice deepened, steady with conviction rather than confusion. The hall brightened as if reclaiming its rightful king. I saw strength return to his gaze, tempered by the sorrow of lost years he could never recover. But instead of allowing regret to consume him, he turned grief into resolve. He became once more the leader his people needed, fierce, noble, and unyielding. Riding beside him across the plains of Rohan, I understood what it meant for a king to carry the destiny of his people within his heartbeat. His courage was not born from invincibility, but from knowing precisely what he stood to lose. The Rohirrim themselves mirrored their king's restored spirit. When I looked upon their ranks, I saw men and women bound to land and tradition, shaped by wind, field, and saddle. Their loyalty was not demanded. It was given freely to a ruler who had earned their devotion. Theoden's leadership reminded me that honor is not forged through lineage alone, but through the choices that define a life. Even when he rode toward the greatest battle of his age, knowing death awaited him, he did so with a clarity that made the earth tremble beneath the hooves of his riders. His final charge carved itself into my memory, as the very embodiment of noble sacrifice. A king choosing to die on his feet rather than live in the shadow of fear. If Théoden's tale is one of regaining honor, Denethor's story speaks to the slow erosion of it. Walking the halls of Minas Tirith under his rule felt like wandering through a fortress built not only of stone, but of suspicion, grief, and silent despair. Denethor was a man who once held the stewardship of Gondor with dignity, but grief for his lost wife and the pressure of safeguarding a kingdom under siege chipped away at his spirit. Each passing year weighed more heavily on him, clouding his judgment and twisting his love for his sons into something brittle. His devotion to Boromir became a desperate anchor, and his treatment of Faramir revealed a heart struggling under the unbearable strain of expectation and loss. I saw in Denethor a tragedy formed not from malice, but from a mind that had forgotten hope. His gaze hardened whenever Sauron's shadow crept closer, as if he believed resistance was futile and surrender inevitable. Gondor's steward fell not because he lacked strength, but because he lacked faith in his people, in Middle-earth, and ultimately in himself. When I watched him descend into despair, refusing counsel, pushing away every hand that reached out to steady him, I understood how isolation can consume even the most capable leader. His downfall was not a sudden collapse, but a series of small concessions to fear until fear alone ruled him. Yet amid the sorrow of Denethor's unraveling, Faramir stood as a quiet testament to Gondor's enduring nobility. In him, I saw the strength that his father could no longer recognize. His loyalty to Gondor remained steady, even under the weight of rejection no child should ever endure. Where Denethor saw weakness, I saw restraint. Where Denethor saw inadequacy, I saw wisdom. When Faramir chose mercy over ambition, integrity over demand, he revealed a different path, one a steward blinded by grief could no longer fathom. His story taught me that honor does not always shout, sometimes it whispers from the edges of neglect. Between these two realms, Rohan rising from despair and Gondor sinking into it, I found myself reflecting on the fragile nature of leadership. A kingdom is shaped by its ruler's heart, and the heart itself is shaped by doubt, loss, hope, and fate. Théoden regained himself when he chose to trust those around him, allowing light back into a mind clouded by deception. Denethor lost himself when he shut out every voice except the one that echoed his own despair. The contrast between them struck me deeply, revealing how destiny does not choose a hero. The hero chooses how to meet destiny. Aragorn's presence linked these two worlds in ways I only fully grasped later. In him, Rohan found a steadfast ally, and Gondor glimpsed the return of a lineage long thought broken. I watched how his actions influenced both realms, not through declarations of kingship, but through unwavering resolve. In Rohan, he fought beside the riders as an equal, earning their trust. In Gondor, his arrival at a moment of near ruin did not come as a claim to power, but as an answer to the despair that had nearly consumed the city. He became the bridge between two kingdoms struggling under the weight of their destinies, proving that true leadership is not an inheritance but a calling answered through sacrifice and clarity. As I look back on these intertwined fates, I see a pattern shaped by honor, madness, and destiny. Théoden rose by reclaiming what he nearly lost. Denethor fell by surrendering to what he feared. And Aragorn stepped into the role history had carved for him not by force but by the gravity of his character. Their stories taught me that power reveals more than it bestows. It exposes the fragile truths we hide and magnifies the strength we nurture. In the end, the kingdoms of Rohan and Gondor survived not because of armies or walls, but because their leaders rose or fell in ways that shaped the future of all who called Middle-earth home. Sauron's presence reached me long before I ever understood the extent of his power, for his shadow did not merely fall across lands, it settled into the consciousness of those who lived beneath it. I felt it first as a pressure in the air, a silence that tightened the farther I traveled eastward, as though the world itself held its breath. Sauron was not a monster of brute force, but a will that sought to dominate thought, spirit, and destiny. His essence lingered in the cracks of Middle-earth, like an ancient storm waiting to break. I understood then that darkness does not always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it comes as a whisper promising order, promising clarity, promising victory, until the promise becomes a chain. He had once been a being of light, a Maya woven from the same origin as those who later guided us toward hope, and that truth disturbed me deeply. To know that corruption can grow from the same soil as wisdom reminded me that power itself is never the enemy. The hunger to possess it without restraint is. Sauron's descent was not immediate. It took roots slowly, like frost spread across a window, forming patterns that seemed harmless until the entire surface hardened. When he forged the One Ring, he did not create a weapon of destruction but a vessel for domination, infused with his will so completely that even after he lost his physical form, the ring maintained his presence. I often sensed that presence as a distant pressure when the ring was near, as though his gaze passed through the world unseen, searching. The land of Mordor bore the mark of his ambition more clearly than any tale could describe. When I walked near its borders, the air felt thick, as if saturated with centuries of sorrow. The mountains that encircled it rose like jagged teeth, forming a prison he himself had forged. Nothing there grew without strain. The ground felt weary, as though drained by the relentless pull of a will that refused to release anything from its grasp. Even from afar, the eye watching from Barad-dûr radiated a vigilance that never faltered. It was not rage, I sensed, but an unyielding certainty, a belief that all things would eventually bend. That certainty terrified me more than any roar or flame. Yet Sauron did not act alone. His greatest enforcers, the Nazgûl, moved like shadows carved from fear itself. Among them, the Witch King of Angmar stood as the embodiment of Sauron's cruelty and precision. I remember the first time I felt his presence. The cold that wrapped itself around my spine, the sudden urge to flee despite having nowhere safe to run. He did not need to strike to wound. His mere arrival was enough to unravel courage. The Nine had surrendered their wills long ago when they accepted the rings of power, believing they could command the gifts offered to them. Like so many others, they misunderstood the nature of Sauron's generosity. He never gives without taking, and what he took was the very thing that makes a person whole. The Witch King was once a man of great stature, perhaps even admired, yet when he became a servant of Sauron, his identity dissolved into something hollow. I often wondered what remnants of his former self lingered beneath the armor and the hood. Did he remember the taste of victory won by his own strength? Did he recall the sound of his own name? Or had the ring stripped those memories until only obedience remained? When I watched him lead armies across the Pelennor fields, I saw not hatred but purpose, a relentless focus that made him more terrifying than any monstrous beast. He moved with the certainty of one who no longer feared death, for death had already claimed him. What struck me most deeply was how Sauron and the Witch King wielded fear as their primary weapon. Fear weakens resolve long before swords are drawn. Fear divides allies, clouds judgment, turns strength into trembling. I witnessed how soldiers froze at the sound of the Nazgûl's cry, as if the scream pierced straight through courage and tore it apart. Even the bravest faltered when the Witch King descended, for his presence seemed to drain hope from the air. I felt it too, though I tried to hide it behind the steadiness of my steps. The truth is that resisting such terror is not a matter of strength but of will, a will that must be reforged each time fear rises. Despite the overwhelming shadow they cast, I came to realize something vital. Darkness spreads not because it is strong, but because it is persistent. Sauron did not stop when he lost battles. He did not fade when his body was destroyed. He waited. He rebuilt. He whispered into the cracks of the world until the cracks widened enough for him to return. His strategy relied not on overwhelming force, but on wearing down hope. And hope, I discovered, is the most fragile and the most resilient element in any struggle. If preserved, even in a dim spark, it can outshine a vast abyss. In Gondor and Rohan, I saw the evidence of that lingering struggle. The fear Sauron inspired drove leaders to doubt themselves, forced armies to question their strength, and tested bonds that once seemed unbreakable. Yet it also forged resilience in unexpected places. I met farmers who took up arms despite trembling hands. I saw ordinary men and women stand against foes they believed unbeatable. Their courage rose not from confidence, but from necessity, shaped by the understanding that surrender would mean losing more than their lands. It would mean losing themselves. As I reflect on these forces of darkness, I understand that Sauron's true danger lay not in his armies or towers, but in his ability to make others believe resistance was hopeless. The Witch King embodied that illusion of inevitability, a looming reminder that surrender is always the easier path. But I also saw how that illusion shattered the moment someone stood their ground. One act of defiance exposed the cracks in their power, revealing that even endless shadow depends on the absence of light. When Éowyn faced the Witch King, when small hands carried a burden meant to break the mighty, when weary hearts refused to bow, the darkness wavered. I learned then that shadows stretch far, but they are never solid. They cannot claim anything that refuses to yield. And though Sauron's presence felt boundless, though the Witch King moved like inevitability incarnate, their downfall proved that no darkness, no matter how vast, can endure when even a single soul dares to stand against it. Gollum's story has followed me like a shadow I never quite escaped, not because it frightened me, but because it demanded something deeper than judgment. I first sensed his presence not through sight or sound, but through the uneasy tension that clings to a place when a lost soul wanders near. His footsteps were soft, yet the weight of his past pressed heavily upon the air. When at last I looked into his eyes, I realized I was not gazing at a creature shaped solely by malice, but at a spirit broken slowly, relentlessly, by a darkness he never asked to carry. His tragedy did not begin with a scream. It began with a whisper from a golden ring. He had once been Sméagol, a hobbit-like creature with laughter in his voice and curiosity in his steps. I often try to imagine him on the morning of his birthday, strolling along a riverbank with the innocence of someone who has never faced true temptation. That innocence shattered in a heartbeat the moment the ring revealed itself. He reached for it not because he hungered for power, but because the ring awakened something dormant, something small and human that spiraled swiftly beyond control. The act that followed, violent, shocking, irreversible, was not born from hatred alone, but from the ring's promise that he was meant to have it. The ring never speaks with force, it seduces, and Sméagol, unaware of the trap, stepped willingly into its grasp. As the years crawled forward, he retreated into darkness, both literal and internal. His transformation was not sudden, it unfolded gradually, like water wearing away stone. His body twisted into shapes that no longer remembered sunlight. His voice fractured into two competing echoes of himself. The remnant of Sméagol pleading for redemption, and the emerging Gollum clinging to the ring, as if it were the only truth left to him. I witnessed that conflict more clearly than I expected, each side battling for control, not through grand gestures, but through trembling whispers, shifting expressions, and fleeting moments when his eyes softened before hardening again. His duality became a window into a suffering that rarely found words. Walking with him felt like walking beside a mirror that revealed the fragile edges of my own will. The ring had carved into him a desperation that made every movement, every breath, a negotiation between desire and restraint. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the journey wore thin, I heard him muttering to himself, trying to soothe his terrors or justify his intentions. Those moments made me understand that he did not merely crave the ring, he feared the emptiness that stretched behind a life without it. The ring had become his identity, his comfort, his curse. And that is the cruelty I could not ignore. He clung to the very thing that destroyed him because it was the only thing left that made him feel alive. Yet even amid his torment, I saw glimpses of Sméagol resurfacing, fragile and fleeting, like sunlight slipping through cracks in a cave. When trust was offered to him, hesitantly at first, his posture shifted, his voice softened, and hope flickered within him. For a brief moment, I believed he could change, that the path back to kindness was not entirely lost. He responded to compassion with a trembling sincerity that broke my heart because it revealed how little compassion he had known for centuries. That glimpse made his tragedy heavier, not lighter. For if he had been entirely consumed by darkness, pity would have been easier. But seeing the remnants of goodness struggling within him made his suffering almost unbearable to witness. The world around him rarely understood this nuance. Many saw him only as a threat, a liar, a creature corrupted beyond salvation. And in truth, there were moments when he justified those fears. His cunning sharpened in the presence of danger. His mistrust grew whenever suspicion was cast upon him. I watched him recoil when treated harshly, the Sméagol within retreating into silence as the Gollum persona rose to protect them both. Cruelty hardened him, and kindness softened him, yet neither could fully reclaim or erase what the ring had done. He became a paradox, dangerous and vulnerable, deceitful and sincere, a victim and a threat bound together in a single form. His longing for the ring was not merely obsession, it was the anchor of his existence. The ring had shaped his mind to believe that without it, he would vanish into nothingness. I heard that longing in every rasped word he uttered, saw it in every trembling reach of his hand. He loved the ring with the devotion of someone who has lost everything else, and he hated it with the intensity of someone who knows, deep down, that the object of his love is also the source of his ruin. This duality made him unpredictable, but it also made him painfully human in a way I could not deny. Traveling with him forced me to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil is rarely simple. It is born from weakness, amplified by temptation, and cemented by isolation. Gollum was never a beast shaped solely by his own choices. He was a being twisted by centuries of torment, manipulated by a power designed to break even the strongest wills. His every step was a battle, his every decision a struggle, and when that struggle finally led him to Mount Doom, I saw the fragile balance within him collapse once and for all. At the brink of the world's salvation, when my own resolve faltered, and the ring seized the last of its influence over my mind, it was Gollum, broken, desperate, consumed by longing, who took the final plunge into fate. His hands grasped the ring with a joy so fierce it eclipsed every other emotion he had ever felt. Yet in the same heartbeat, that joy carried him over the edge. He fell not as a villain claiming victory, but as a soul bound eternally to the object that destroyed him. And in that fall, the world was freed. His final act was not heroic by intention, but its consequence shaped the destiny of all Middle-earth. As I reflect on his tale, I cannot bring myself to hate him. He frightens me, yes, but he also moves me in ways few others ever have. He is the embodiment of a tragedy that reveals more about vulnerability than villainy. He was a reminder that even the smallest heart can be twisted by power, and even the most corrupted soul can unknowingly deliver salvation. Gollum remains one of the most haunting figures I have ever known, not because of what he did, but because of what he lost, what he might have been, and what his suffering reveals about the darkness that lies dormant in all of us. The moment Sauron's fall began was not loud. It arrived as a tension in the air, a tremor too subtle for armies to sense but unmistakable to anyone who had felt the weight of the ring. Standing at the edge of the Black Gate, surrounded by exhausted warriors who faced certain defeat, I sensed a shift so slight it could have been imagined. Yet something inside me recognized it. The breaking of a chain long wrapped around the world. We had marched here with no illusion of victory. We came to distract the eye, to draw its gaze away from the true struggle unfolding miles away. And as the ground quivered beneath my feet, I realized that the fate of every soldier around me now rested on a battle none of them could witness. The sky above Mordor darkened, warped by the force of a will that refused to accept the unraveling of its dominion. I felt the eye searching, frantic, aware that something was slipping beyond its control. That dread washed across the plain like a cold wind, tightening every breath in my chest. Yet within that fear lived a spark of defiance. We stood not as conquerors but as a shield for the one heart still carrying the ring toward its end. The clash of steel and the cries of the wounded blurred into a distant hum as I strained to sense what was happening on the slopes of Mount Doom. And then, through the choking air of the battlefield, a wave of despair surged from the eye as if it had glimpsed the truth. In that instant, Mount Doom roared. The ground heaved beneath us, cracking open with a force that seemed to tear the world from within. I stumbled as soldiers around me dropped their weapons, not from cowardice but from awe. A column of fire erupted into the sky, splitting the shadows as if the mountain itself had long awaited the chance to purge its heart. I felt the tremor pass, reverberating through every bone in my body. I did not yet know what had happened, but I felt it deeply, profoundly. The ring was gone. Its grasp, its will, its ancient hunger, gone. A burden that had terrified even the wise simply vanished like breath on cold glass. Then the eye changed. Its piercing glare flickered, faltered, and for the first time since I had learned to fear it, I sensed confusion within its light. It searched wildly, no longer calculating but desperate. A scream silent yet overwhelming seemed to echo within the sky as the tower beneath it shuddered. Barad-dûr cracked along its foundations, vast stones sliding like grains of sand. The darkness that had towered over Middle-earth for so long began to crumble, folding inward under the collapse of its own power. I watched in stunned stillness as the symbol of endless shadow ruptured and fell, its destruction stretching across the horizon like a long-delayed dawn. Mordor itself convulsed as though releasing a breath it had been forced to hold for centuries. The plains buckled, the ground split, and rivers of molten fire surged like the veins of a wounded giant. Armies that once advanced with ruthless precision now scattered in panic, their will shattered once the force binding them vanished. For the first time, I saw the creatures of Sauron not as unstoppable horrors, but as beings suddenly stripped of purpose. They fled toward the mountains, stumbling, roaring in confusion, no longer driven by a master who whispered commands into their minds. Without Sauron's will, they were mere fragments of chaos dissolving into the ruins of the land he had claimed. Yet the world did not immediately rejoice. The silence that followed the fall of the tower felt heavy, reverent, as though every witness needed time to believe what they had seen. I stood amid the wreckage of the battlefield, breathing the dust of a dying empire, and let the enormity of it wash over me. The darkness that had overshadowed our lives for so long was not a cloud drifting away. It had been broken, shattered by a force far smaller and more fragile than it ever imagined. I felt the ache of exhaustion rise through me, not from the wounds of battle, but from the sudden release of fear I had carried for far too long. As the smoke thinned and the tremors settled, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the choking air above Mordor. It was a pale light, trembling and unsure, but it felt like a promise. The warriors around me stood straighter, as if remembering how to hope. I watched their faces shift from disbelief to relief, and in that transformation I saw the dawn of a new age. Sauron's fall did not simply end a war, it unbound the hearts of countless people who had forgotten the taste of peace. It broke the silence that had dictated the rhythm of their fear. And as I inhaled the cool breath of the rising wind, I knew the world would never return to what it had been. When I looked toward the horizon where Mount Doom still burned, I felt grief mingling with gratitude. The victory came at a cost measured not in numbers but in souls lost friends, broken kingdoms, shattered innocence. Yet within that grief lived something purer than triumph. It was the knowledge that even the smallest act of courage can reshape the future. The fall of Sauron reminded me that darkness, no matter how ancient or immense, can be undone by the persistence of those who refuse to bow to it. And as the light spread across the plains, warming the scars of battle, I sensed the truth settle within me. Dawn is not the absence of night. It is the refusal of night to remain. When I step back from every shadowed valley, every whispered temptation, every triumph etched into the bones of this tale, I am left with a truth that feels larger than myth. The Lord of the Rings is not merely a story. It is a world that exposes the fragile brilliance of courage, the quiet cost of hope, and the undeniable strength found in even the smallest heart. No matter how many times I return to Middle-earth, its depth still astonishes me. Every character breathes with intention, every choice echoes through ages, and every moment reminds me why this saga stands unmatched in the realm of fantasy. If this journey has moved you even half as deeply as it continues to move me, then let your curiosity stay awake a little longer. Share your thoughts. Tell me which part clung to you, which character carved their place in your memory, which moment made you understand the meaning of light against overwhelming dark. Your voice matters here, and I want to hear it. If you enjoyed this reflection, remember to like the video, leave your comment below, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey into the worlds we love. Middle-earth still has many stories to tell, and I'll be here to guide you through each one.